Thank you. Here we are. Welcome to the Dhu Varren Road Sidewalk Assessment. And we are here to re-engage with the three of you and anyone else we got a fourth that just joined us, and those that came in are online to talk about what we've learned over the course of the summer and put our thoughts together as what was a good feasible option for further consideration and vetting. And so welcome. Were the two of you here last time? You were? Great. Hi, welcome. How are you? Oh, you're fine. You're good. We're kind of got a chill atmosphere here today. So anyways, were you here at the last meeting then?
No.
Okay, so we have two people who are new, welcome, and then two that were here the first time around. So this is just like a slide we use all the time.
That's the same meeting as the first?
No, different meeting. It was the first meeting that talked about, I'll get into it in a minute. So, so as far as just a standard slide we have here for meeting etiquette, we commit to learning and avoiding speculation. And we just ask that you please remember the importance of rights and the dignity of others. And we want to critique ideas and not necessarily the people delivering the thoughts and the ideas. And we want to use thoughtful language so that this is a comfortable and respectful session for all participants. So in the back, we have Jasmine. Jasmine is our city's communication engagement specialist. Nicholas Hutchinson, our city engineer, is not here. He was here at the first meeting, but he's not able to join us tonight due to a conflict. I now have dual citizenship between Wade Trim and the city of Ann Arbor. So I am representing the city today as far as engineering goes. So tonight's agenda, we have the recap of the previous engagement session. We will talk about feedback that was received at the last session. We'll talk about design concepts that we've come up with based on that feedback we received. We'll go through what our estimated projected costs are, broken down by side of the road. We'll touch on some of the advantages and disadvantages that came to us, but obviously you guys are probably closer to this, you guys are closer to the situation, so we're welcome to hear your advantages and disadvantage viewpoints. And then we'll talk about what the next steps would be and then have our breakout session in the back for those of us that are present in the room. Okay, so recap from last engagement session. So the last meeting was held in this room on June 30th. And what we were talking about was why we were there the first time around was the city has an objective to provide a balanced transportation network that is not car-centric, that it provides opportunities for all users to be able to use the public road right-of-ways to get from one point to another. So one of those focus points is looking at corridors that rank high in a system for filling in sidewalk gaps. And Dhu Varren Road fits that description as far as citywide rankings. And the city asked Wade Trim, the company I work for, to do an analysis of what it would take to make that sidewalk gap come to fruition as far as filling those in. And then what would the cost be associated with that so that if and when it happens, they can get the correct amount of funding to work on the project and not fall short. So in other words, you don't want to tell someone it's going to cost $2 million and then it turns out to be $4 million and then you have a $2 million gap in funding. So that's the purpose of why we at Wade Trim, we're trying to, in addition to engaging with your folks, getting a realistic cost estimate put on the table. So we're here to also engage and have community feedback. And we already talked about the realistic estimate. So the slide here are some of the policies related to transportation, the initiatives and goals that the city has. So one of them is complete streets. Complete streets is really a fancy word for having features within the public road right-of-way that utilizes all users, so not just the car, so bicyclists, walkers. Vision Zero is a nationwide program that utilizes techniques and engineering to drastically reduce serious injuries or prevent fatalities to the point where it doesn't happen in your community. So that is something that the city has embraced. Carbon neutrality is what it says. Try to reduce the carbon footprint that occurs within the city And walking definitely contributes to that goal so that less emissions are from car use. The sidewalk millage is since 2020 has been a tax placed upon those that own property within the city to pay for the sidewalk gaps that we're here to talk about this evening on Dhu Varren Road and other corridors throughout the city. And then finally, there's this comprehensive transportation plan, which takes all of the values of complete streets, vision zero, carbon neutrality, and sidewalk millage, focuses in and finds solutions, engineering solutions, or tools within the toolbox that can be implemented to achieve those goals. So that's what the comprehensive transportation plan is. So what was some of the feedback that we received back on June 30th? I think the biggest one that we heard was most participants favored that, hey, everyone thinks it made sense that we had sidewalk on both continuality on the north side, south side, from the limits of Pontiac Trail to Olmsted. If I said that wrong, I apologize. But if funding were limited, then the preference was to have it on the north side of the road versus the south side of the road. So what we ended up doing was putting a cost estimate together, focusing on both sides of the roadway so that we could take an analysis of that and decide which one should come first if we get to that scenario of lack of funding. So then there was a desire for safety enhancements at Carrot Way Crosswalk. So one of the things that we're proposing to do for a project is to include what we call an RRFB, which is a rectangular, rapid rectangular flashing beacon. So those are push buttons and there's a pedestrian sign and there's those beacons that go off there. So we put that into the estimate. There's also a desire for additional marked crosswalks at existing intersections and bus stops. And essentially in this one, it's an open-ended statement, but the city does embrace additional marked crosswalks where safety is enhanced. So basically what that means is once we get further into the weeds, we want to make sure that there's sight distance that's accounted for so someone's not blindly walking into the road and they can't see an oncoming car and vice versa. Some things are road related that we can't fix. So you just want to put crosswalks in the right locations. And so that's what the city does embrace that. So they're all on board where it makes sense. Speaking of sight distance, there was a mention of sight distances limited when exiting Birch Drive. That's because of the retaining wall on the east side there as you're driving south. And the good news is that we are going to revamp that intersection there to get rid of the auxiliary lanes. That's going to create space now for a driver to pull up further to the edge of the roadway and then have a clear line of sight to the left and to the right. And then there was, very importantly, environmental impacts to Dhu Varren Woods Nature Preserve. So we did have this sit down with City Parks and the Recreation Department, same group of people, and they are supportive of a project on the south side of the road. We just want to make sure that we do it in a manner that preserves as much as the woods area as possible. Obviously, north side would be better from their perspective, but they also realistically understand that both sides from a holistic standpoint makes sense. So we would work in tandem with that group to make sure that we are implementing design features that are that work well for that nature preserve. Okay, so that just leads us then into what are the alternatives? So there really isn't much of a this versus that. Raise your hand if you vote, like some of the projects that we've had on other corridors along the roadway. So we're just going to go segment by segment, starting from Pontiac Trail, working to the east. And so Fred, I see you raised your hand. We're going to get through the presentation first, and then we'll have your question answered. Okay, sir? So we'll go from Pontiac Trail. So there is, on the north side, there's already a pathway that exists along Olson Park. So we only really need to focus on the south side of the road. We looked at both sides of the roadway with the goal of accomplishing sidewalk connectivity on both sides. So that's why there's not a this versus that, other than which one should we do first if we don't have the funding. The blue represents the south sidewalk. The green, which is not on this slide, would represent the north sidewalk. There is a thick purple line that represents what we call a shared use path, which is more or less 12 foot wide. And then that green dashed line is a north side proposed boardwalk. You know, we'll get into that in a minute. You'll see sporadically, it's not shown on this slide like it should, but I think in your handout it does show it. There are 2 areas that should show protected tree. So there's individual trees where we feel that called out that made sense to protect. So there were, from memory, 4 of them in these next 2 slides that we wanted to identify because it may be beneficial to someone that owns property on participating, whether online or in this room tonight. So the idea is to take a 5-foot sidewalk. That's the width of the blue line and the green line, starting from what exists at Pontiac Trail to go east and then connect to the existing sidewalk. That's more or less across from Olson Park entrance. The red lines that you see there, that is removing what we're calling those auxiliary lanes, that acceleration, deceleration lanes. That's kind of a thing of the past that was used on high-speed roadways. We're trying to reduce the speeds on these roads, like not encourage people to drive fast. So we're going to be getting rid of that feature there in order to create space for better sight lines. Next slide here, as we progress to the east, we are connecting to the sidewalk that exists from the condominium unit on the south side of the road across from Olson Park. Again, Olson still has a pathway that exists along the north side. So just have to focus on the south side there. You can see that on this slide, I do show those protected trees. So there are one's an evergreen and one's a deciduous tree, both big, prominent, and healthy. So we want to make sure that we can work around that. And I believe that's very feasible to do so without having to have them removed or cut. So essentially, it's going to continue on the south side where there's a gap on 1, 2, 3 parcels, and then connect to, I believe, a commercial development across from Carrot Top Way. Continuing, moving to the east, there's a bus stop that exists at Carrot Way, both sides of the roadway going eastbound and westbound. So that crosswalk does exist today, but I did put, for simplicity reasons, not in the legend there, but that crosswalk sign would represent where an RFB would go, that rapid flashing rectangular beacon setup. So that's one of the locations where we think it definitely makes sense. Again, narrowing down the auxiliary lanes, acceleration, deceleration lanes on both sides of the roadway. And then we would pick up where sidewalk ends at Leslie Park Circle, continuing to the east. We are proposing to essentially keep a buffer space, variable space. As you can see, it jogs further away from the road to closer to the road. That has to do with topography reasons that you can't see on a 2-dimensional view. So there's plenty of flat space in that area where we can keep it further away from the road. But as we get closer to the right side of the slide, it starts dropping off as far as getting deeper. So we want to make sure that we utilize that space without having to use a lot of fill material, which is an impact to the environment. Go back here a second. So there's a small segment. I'm going to say, give or take 300, 400 feet on Dhu Varren Road, east of Carrot Way on the north side, where the pathway ends. So that is where the north side segment starts as far as a proposed alignment. And that area right there is prone to flooding, and there is a creek crossing there. So what we're doing is proposing what we're calling a boardwalk, which will essentially act as a bridge. It'll be closer to the roadway. It'll be 14 foot in width, but that will be elevated so that it's not going to be impacted by any type of flooding in that area during a high water rain event. So that connectivity will remain in place. Continuing on that north side then, it will ultimately meet the grade near the railroad tracks. So that's why that boardwalk ends, because that type of feature costs about $2,000 a foot to install. So it gets pretty expensive compared to just putting down a standard sidewalk. So you don't want to just arbitrarily use a boardwalk for a long length of period, because the cost both to build it and to maintain it. So on the south side of the road, you'll see what is a blue ladder shape type symbol, and that's retaining wall. So the retaining wall is proposed in areas where there either needs to be, well, dirt needs to either be filled in an area or cut in an area so that it is not impacting, broaching so far into the property where we're going to have to cut a bunch of trees or do a bunch of disturbance, whether in the right of way or outside the right of way, to build the sidewalk feature. Because one of the initiatives that we had in June was to limit any disturbances outside of the road, public road right of way. So in those types of areas, that's where we're proposing a retaining wall. And that retaining wall will go anywhere from 4 foot to 6 foot in height. It might go a little bit bigger in a few other areas. And you'll see it, that symbol that is shown on your screen there and on your handout occasionally throughout the limits of the project, both on the north and the south side of the roadway. So there's the DTE substation that's on the north. So there's already sidewalk there. So there's a perfect example of why we're here today, to fill in these gaps. And then the existing subdivision just starts off to the right of your screen there. We would start proposing to place that green line, that sidewalk, off with a buffer space of give or take 3 feet from the edge of the existing roadway, with the 5 foot walkway, sidewalk, concrete, and then the retaining wall that would be put there so they're not removing earth approaching homes that are, or backyards that are existing, give or take 30 feet off of the road right away, and limit the amount of disturbance to vegetation that's there. On the south side of the roadway, it would be a continuous, on this slide, continuous connection from just past the railroad to the west and going through it again as we start approaching Dhu Varren Woods. Important note here that I haven't mentioned today is that every time that we cross the pathway or sidewalk crosses a driveway, we are proposing to rebuild that driveway in kind with the material that exists today. If it's concrete or if it's asphalt, if it's stone, we would work with the property owner to figure out what type of approach makes sense for that, because you don't want stone getting washed up onto the sidewalk, whether it's to the left or to the right. So we would need to work out the drainage in the area, put a new driveway culvert in. All those features would get worked out as part of a design as we get into the nuts and bolts of that. And it really would have very limited impacts on anyone's house to get to and from. We'd work that out with the contractor. Happens all the time in construction. Okay. So now we're at the across from Birchwood Drive and Dhu Varren Woods. So there's a bus stop that exists on Birchwood Drive on the north that goes for the westbound movement. So we would continue to show that sidewalk connecting to Birchwood. There's no need from our projected field visit to have any type of retaining wall in that area. And then sticking on the north side of the road, as we move the crosswalk that exists to the north of there, hard to see on that screen there, but it's about 50 feet, give or take, from where we're showing now. We just want to make it a same line so that the pedestrian doesn't have to jog north, cross, jog south, and go back. That's not what people are going to do. They're just going to cross the roadway at that point. So that's why we're proposing to move that crosswalk there. You can see we're proposing to move that curb and gutter, as I talked about in one of the introductory slides, to increase sight distance there for the auxiliary lanes. So that will take care of line of sight that you can't see today. That retaining wall will remain in place on the northeast corner there. So why is there a purple line there? That shared use path, which is 12 foot. Currently on the south side of the roadway from Pontiac Trail to Olmsted, there is a bike lane on the roadway. But that bike lane on the north side only goes from Birchwood to Pontiac Trail. There is no space, safe space for bicyclists to reverse between Birchwood to Olmsted. So what we're proposing is a multi-use pathway, or that shared use path. And that is an area that you see like in a county park, other areas where cyclists and walkers get to share the same area together. So that's where that 12-foot width comes into place. So because it's wider there, we would need to have that retaining wall shown on the north side of the roadway. And then eventually it's going to transition as we get into a depression area, which is more or less from what I gather to be a detention area where water from the community gathers into it before it traverses someplace else. Again, showing that dashed green line as the north side proposed boardwalk. For the south side of the roadway, it's predominantly all Dhu Varren woods. One of the questions that I asked the parks folks was, for those of you that are familiar with it, there's a trailhead at that spot, and it's give or take 5 foot higher than the back curb. And it's pretty relatively close within, I'd say, 6 feet of that back of curb there. So there's really not a good way for a person to, unless you're really good condition and fit, to get up there. Even if you had a stroller and a baby and you want to take your kid into the woods, be kind of challenging. Let's put it that way, be challenging. So what we're ended up showing for now, there's one of two ways that we could do this. In order to get the grades to work for people with disabilities, we'd have to go pretty deep into the woods, which would be an impact to the environment as a whole. And we didn't want to do that. So what we're proposing, and this is just schematic, this isn't, I drew a wide distance in there just so you could see it, a zigzag pattern there so that you can get that elevation from the roadway to the top and the shortest offset possible from the back of curb. So something like that would be ADA compliant and would have the least amount of disruption environmentally to the Dhu Varren woods. So that's what that represents, that zigzag there. Pedestrian sign is there, so that would propose the RRFB, whether the north side or the south side were to go first. I would think that the entranceway into Dhu Varren woods and the RRFB would be included, even if we did the north side first. I would suspect that would also be included on the north side cost. Retaining wall would be necessary along the entire frontage of Dhu Varren woods so that we are limiting the amount of trees that would be cut and earth that is removed in order to put that sidewalk in place. And then finally, last slide, an aerial perspective. The boardwalk is traversing on the north side, that green dashed line, through that depression area, and then continuing to a shared use path. So we're going from 12 foot to 14 foot to 12 foot. And then on both segments on the north side, you see this little flared end. That represents a ramp for bicyclists to be able to enter and exit. You can see it on both sides there. From the off-road unit pathway to the designated space that's within the street for cyclists to use. So that's what that represents. And that this would also facilitate the bus stop that's there just at the intersection. For the south side of the roadway, we have the blue line, 5-foot sidewalk with the proposed retaining wall there to limit any impacts to the existing neighborhood that exists there. So that in a nutshell is what it looks like from the aerial. Now you'll see throughout these slides, you've noticed it, D1, D2. That's something we showed at the first presentation. That's going to be cross sections, which I'll toggle back and forth to give you a sense of where they're at. But I'm going to go now show you a cross-sectional view of 4 different areas. Okay, so first one, section A, which is more or less 400 feet east of Hunley. So going back to, that is directly across from Olson Park, where the soccer fields are present today. So that is the cross section that you would be looking at on this slide as we go back and forth. So in the upper left corner there, that gives you an aerial view with that arrow showing where approximately this cross section is cut. And then you have a street view to the right of that from Google that shows you what it looks like today to give you perspective to what we're proposing on this cross section, which reflects what we're showing on the aerial views. So we have the existing pathway that's shown on the north, that's on the north side for Olson Park, would be focused on the south side of the roadway. And that area would be a 5-foot sidewalk. And we'd want to maintain drainage from the roadway between the sidewalk and the roadway itself. So we wouldn't need any type of enclosed drainage system. One of the things I mentioned at the previous presentation was in some areas, drainage and a sidewalk can't coexist, meaning there's not enough space for the sidewalk. It has to go right on top of where the ditch is today. So the water has to go someplace. So that's when you would implement an underground system of storm sewers. Fortunately, in this case, you don't need it. So that saves on costs. Okay. So moving on to the second cross section, B, go back to the big view. So B is it's closer to the railroad tracks, but between Carrot Way and Ann Arbor Railroad, near that depression area, where the creek is, I want to use my terms right. So again, you can see the yellow arrow where it is today. And they have guardrail on the north side because topography falls off, give or take from memory, 8 to 10 feet down to the bottom. And then it's more of a gradual fall off on the south side of the roadway where there's a shelf. We'll call it a shelf area, limited, but nonetheless a shelf. And then it starts falling in grade. So this is one of those areas where we were proposing, this specific area, proposing that we'd have that 14-foot boardwalk behind the guardrail that's there. The distance of that in proximity to one another would be to be determined. We're just showing it at a relative distance away from each other, but to give you a schematic of what it would look like. So it's elevated above the ground, won't be prone to flooding. It would be set at the right elevation. So then you have within your roadway, your 5-foot, it's shoulder, but it's treated as a bikeway today. And then you'd have 11-foot travel lanes on each side, 5-foot shoulder. And then on the south side of the roadway, we show a 3-foot buffer. Buffer is just a fancy word for space between the sidewalk and the back of curb to enhance safety and give ease to the walker so they don't feel like there's a car rushing by them. And then we have the 5-foot sidewalk with what we clear zone. That's nothing more than a fancy term for a little shy distance to create separation between a fence and the sidewalk. The fence would be there to protect pedestrians from falling off in a case like this, where the topography goes down and we show a retaining wall there. So that's why you see a clear zone. That's what that means. Think of it like this. If there were a bicycle on the sidewalk, it prevents the handlebars from catching that fence. So it's kind of a safe space that's provided. Okay, cross section C. This is 350 feet east of Birchwood. So we are just east of the DTE substation that's there today. So you can see in the upper left where approximately that cross section shows. In the existing view for today, they have what we call an asphalt curb on the north side of the roadway, concrete curb on the south side of the roadway, bike lanes on both. So in order to facilitate a non-motorized use walkway on both sides, we have to provide it and engineer for it. So both cases require a retaining wall. So focusing on the north side first, we still be able to have that 3-foot buffer space between the back of the asphalt curb, 5-foot sidewalk, 2-foot clear zone away from the retaining wall. And similar to the north side of the roadway, we have the south side, 3-foot buffer space, 5-foot sidewalk, and 2-foot clear zone. So mirror images of each other. And that would retain the existing layout that we have today with pavement markings of the bike lanes and the 2 travel lanes. And last cross section that we're showing here for demonstration purposes is at that detention area there. So just remain consistent. On Lasad Drive, so just 450 feet, give or take, east of Birchwood in this case, 300 feet west of Olmsted. So guardrail again on the north side with that asphalt curb, and guardrail on the south side, also with an asphalt curb there. So this is the area where we're showing again that boardwalk. That would just be a bridge. Distance between the boardwalk and the guardrail that exists today to be determined, but again, placed at the right elevation so it's not impacted by water levels. And that would then turn into a non-motorized pathway as we get closer to the end of the project to facilitate as a bike path, because there is no bike lane in this section on the north side of the roadway. On the south side of the roadway, you got the 3-foot buffer space behind the guardrail, 5-foot concrete sidewalk, 2-foot clear zone with a fence there to protect people from falling off behind the retaining wall into the existing space that exists today. Okay, so now we're going to segue into projected costs. We're almost near the finish here. We start engaging with you folks. So we estimate that on the north side of the roadway, it is using $2025. So if this project were to happen 5 years from now, it would need to be inflated. $4.7 million on the north side of the roadway versus $5.2 million on the south. So it's not a substantial difference. In our industry, $500,000 is not substantial when it comes to funding categories, but it's still a difference. So we don't want to minimize it. And then here's the important one to state. At the last meeting, we talked about the sidewalk millage and what it can and can't cover. So for those that were here, the money that's collected from the property taxes for that millage cannot be spent on public lands to build sidewalk. So some other resource would need to be utilized in order to build the sidewalk that's proposed across Dhu Varren Woods. So what does that mean? Well, it could come from the park budget. That would be difficult because they have a lot of demands. But there's other sources of funding at the state and federal levels that can be utilized in order to offset the monies that can't be used from the sidewalk millage to build a sidewalk along the frontage of Dhu Varren Woods. So it's just a little difference to talk about. That's more of a city problem to find the right amount of funding for it. But I just wanted to point that out, that advantages and disadvantages. One could say, well, north side makes more sense because we could capture 100% of the dollars from the millage to use along the north side since there's no public lands that a new sidewalk is being built on. I'm pointing it out just as a fact, but it's more of a city administration problem to figure that where that comes into play. But it can make a difference under the right scenario of circumstances in a certain budget year that can't be predicted today. So I'm just pointing that out as a little fine print. So what are some of the advantages and disadvantages that we can point out here when we look at north side versus south side? So one of the big things that we broached on last time was trees. So we are projecting, this is a rough number, we don't have topography to know the exact number, but we are suspecting there's going to be about 40 trees that would need to be cut along the north side of the road from the beginning to the end of the project, and give or take 70 on the south side, mostly because of Dhu Varren Woods, nature preserve that's there. So as far as tallying up a score, if you want to call it that, I just placed more trees on south side, less trees impacted on the north side. As far as costs go, we saw the previous slide. North side is projected to be $500,000 less than the south. The north side is projected to be $500,000 less than the south side. As far as environmental impacts, that kind of goes really in hand with the estimated trees, because we would be mitigating the wet areas with the boardwalk that would limit the amount of disruption that would happen in wet areas, as opposed to filling it in with dirt. That would be a major impact to the environment. So that kind of is a wash from that perspective. But as far as the trees would definitely be factored into play from an environmental impact. So again, less on the north side, more on the south side. And then we already talked about the public lands and the sidewalk millage. No lands affected on the north side because Olson Park has frontage today, sidewalk today, so we're not focused on that area. And then Dhu Varren Woods on the south side. Okay, so what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? So we had our first engagement session on June 30th, and then the team at Wade Trim working with Ann Arbor, we looked at our analysis, and you're here tonight on October 8th to share with you our findings. And the next step is basically we are going to present a packet of information to city engineering representatives to analyze two things. One, our findings based off of the engagement we had in the first session, and then any further engagement we receive that we're going to record tonight. And then that will be placed together in a report to the engineering group at the city and will be further vetted before any final recommendations are made. At that point, the plan is to say yay, or in this case, decide whether we could do all or only one side of the at a time. Nick Hutchinson, the city engineer, wanted me to state, because he couldn't be here tonight, that if the north side were to happen first or south side, that does not mean that the other side of the roadway falls off the table and never be seen again. He wanted me to stress that at a different budget cycle, that opportunity can come, so it would not be forgotten. The initiative then is to put it within the capital improvement plan. That's a document that the city by law has to have put on, well, created and then published. And it is a planning document that's utilized per year in a five-year span every year, what they're projecting to build and how much that's going to cost to build it. So the dollar figures that we've shown here in this slide, in theory, would then be placed within the CIP, subject to any changes that we would make from in the final report, the final vetting session. As far as when it would happen, to be determined. That would be based on the economy, needs of the city, what funding sources are available at the federal level. So all those things have to come into play. You do your best guess 5 years out, but every year you have to reanalyze that document to determine what the forecast is and modify the year as necessary. So when people ask, when can you build it? The answer is hopefully sooner rather than later, but there is no year to hand out to the public as far as when this might happen. Okay, so we're at a breakout session point now. Where's Carmel at? Because we have a gentleman named Fred who would like to ask a question, and I'm not sure how to use the technology at hand here so that Fred can speak. So Fred, if you're still with us, hold on. Okay. So Fred, if you're, or anyone else that's online here, there's a chat feature that exists in the, I can't even find.
You're right on top of it. It's next to the share button.
Where is it?
Next to the share button.
Yeah, Q&A.
Yes.
Okay.
So he
Look
can
at
write
me.
his question.
So you can type your questions in and I will go ahead and answer them to the best of my abilities. So while we're waiting on that, anyone in the room want to start? We're pretty small, so I'll give the head start to the person typing. I can answer some questions and then we can do the breakout session.
In the meantime, I'll be handing out a feedback form, so you can fill this out before you leave, or if you want to take a note to bear name on it, that's fine. You can email them to me or you can see.
Yes, ma'am.
So my question is to be clear, the south side is more expensive because number one, more trees have to be removed. And what else?
So the question was, is the south side of the road more expensive for the amount of trees that have to be removed? Trees are a factor, trees are a cost, but it's not the only reason. So the amount of retaining wall that would go into place, the width of the sidewalk. So in this case, we're doing only sidewalk on that side, so that offsets some of the cost. So even though we are proposing to put expensive features on the north side of the roadway, it still falls projected 500,000 below. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison when it comes to a specific thing, but trees do definitely play a role in that.
Fred, you can actually type your question in on the same way you just type your question there and we'll be able to answer it, okay?
Rita, go ahead.
I have several questions.
Okay.
First, responsibility for maintenance, in particular in the future. Who is responsible for the
So historically speaking, it's the individual property owners. Now, what we've encountered with here in River Drive and Getty's Road that Nick Hutchinson brought up, he said there might be a possibility where a city can take that on because of the Parks Commission being in close proximity. That's not a guaranteed thing, and we don't have an answer for you tonight. So I would just stick with the conservative estimate of individual property owners will be responsible per city ordinance.
And for the parkland sections,
That'd be the park's responsibility.
can you tell me what material for the retaining walls would be made of?
They would be precast, probably concrete,
So, slabs of concrete, then that's probably something.
like blocks of concrete.
And in terms of I call it the easement between the curb and the edge of the sidewalk,
Okay, the green space.
what goes in there once the project is finished?
So the question, forgive me for those that are at home, what would go into the buffer space that's between the sidewalk and the edge of curve? The answer would be grass. Just plain grass.
It's gonna have to be mowed,
It would have to be mowed.
the city.
City would not maintain people in the frontage along private property.
Okay, so most of those houses are not facing.
Correct.
Just the backside of that house.
It's a good question. I don't know if that would fall on an HOA. It's a good question. I don't know. But we're gonna record it, put it in our notes so that we can, I don't have a substantial answer in that specific case, but if it happened to be in front of a person's yard, it'd be no different than any part of the city where the individual would be responsible for mowing them.
And then DT would have to be responsible for
Their contractor would come and mow that part.
and say, no.
I would suspect that'd be the answer, yes.
I just have a suggestion for those areas. To avoid a lot of mowing and grass.
Okay.
To look into woodburn ground cover that would be native type.
Okay.
That could be maintained, you'd have to watch to make sure that trees didn't grow in it.
Okay.
But it could be something that could be useful, that would be a consistent type of ground cover that is tough. And that we prefer.
No, it's a very environmentally conscious suggestion that you're making. So thank you for that feedback. That's a good point. Okay, we don't have any more questions, so I'm going to close. Oh, that's okay. No, hold on. I'm going to close the Zoom session here. And then what we're going to do is, for those of us in this room, we're going to go back to a table and gather around a drawing there, and we'll continue doing Q&A down there. So for those who are at home, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a good day.